This weekend, the nation of Israel and the Jewish people all over the world will celebrate the annual festival of Purim. This fun-filled holiday will involve wearing fancy dress costumes and eating special delicacies. However, there is a dark side to this celebration, as the Jewish people remember how God liberated them from genocide in the Ancient Persian Empire. The Jewish Festival of Purim is based upon the historical accounts set out in the book of Esther in the Bible. It takes us back to a world over 2,500 years ago at the height of the ancient Persian Empire that is now modern-day Iran. The book of Esther starts with the Jewish people living in the Persian pagan empire, too afraid to reveal their Jewish identity in case of reprisals on their community. The Bible describes how the incredible events that occurred in the book of Esther happened during the reign of King Ahasuerus. The Persian Empire spread from India to Ethiopia and was divided into 120 provinces. The scene is set with King Ahasuerus in the third year of his reign, when he decides to show off his decadence and power by putting on a party of all parties at his palace in Shushan. He invites all his officials, servants, nobles, and the princes of the provinces to the glamorous gathering that would last for 180 days. During the party, King Ahasuerus wanted to show off the beauty of his queen Vashti to the guests at his court, but she refused to join him, which provoked the king's anger. His advisors told him that for the sake of all men of his kingdom, he should make an example of Queen Vashti by dethroning her. They recommended that the king should hold a beauty contest and the winner could be his new queen. Now is the time for the main characters, Mordecai and Esther, to make their mark on this powerful story. Mordecai was a Jew who raised his beautiful niece Hadassah as his own daughter because her parents had died. Hadassah would later be known by a Persian name, Esther. This young woman was very beautiful and lovely in character. When King Ahasuerus sent out a search for his new queen, Esther was spotted because of her great beauty. Esther was taken to the palace and Mordecai advised her to conceal her Jewish identity. Every day, Mordecai would go to the front of the woman's quarter to learn about the plight of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Now, she had undergone 12 months of preparation before she would meet the king. So the day came when she would have her encounter with the king in his royal palace. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she found favor in his eyes, so he made her queen. Shortly after Esther's appointment, her uncle Mordecai uncovered a plot to kill the king. Mordecai reported the sinister plan to Esther, who informed the king. The conspirators were hung on the gallows, and the incident was written down in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. At the same time, the Bible recounts that the king Ahasuerus appointed Haman to be his prime minister, to govern over his empire, and he would take center stage in this story. To the anger of Haman, Mordecai refused to bow down or pay homage to him, as the other servants did at the king's gate. Haman, filled with hatred and rage, decided not to strike Mordecai, but would instead seek to destroy all the Jews throughout the kingdom. Haman decided to cast lots to determine the day and the month that the Jews of the empire would be ethnically cleansed, and therefore the Jewish festival is called Purim, named after the Persian word for casting lots. Haman goes to the king and tells him about the Jews who are scattered and dispersed amongst the people and throughout the empire, and that their laws are different, and that they do not keep the king's laws. He also convinced the king that the Jews were disloyal subjects, so Haman deceived the king into ushering a decree to annihilate the entire Jewish community from his kingdom. Mordecai, on hearing the horrific news, tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes to mourn for the pending destruction of his people. The Jews of the kingdom also mourned and fasted before the Lord for their deliverance. When Queen Esther heard what was going to happen to her people, she sent a message to Mordecai that she was fearful of pleading the plight of the Jews of the empire before the king, in the belief that she would be killed. Mordecai replied with a powerful message to her. Do you not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews? For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther sent a message to tell Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Shushan, to fast and pray for 3 days for her, and she would approach the king. She came to the king and found favor in his eyes, and he said to him that she wanted to hold a banquet for her king and Haman. Now Haman was filled with pride and boasting because of his new powerful position and how the queen had invited only the king and himself to a banquet. That night the king could not sleep, so he commanded his servants to bring him the book of Chronicles, and he opened the page where it was recorded that Mordecai had saved the king's life by exposing the plot to murder him. The king was shocked to learn that Mordecai had not been honored. At the same time, Haman was on his way to the king to suggest that he should hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had made for him. In an incredible turn of events, the king decided to honor Mordecai for saving his life by honoring him, and Haman, his arch enemy, had to put a royal robe on him and parade him around the city in front of the adoring crowds. This was pure humiliation for Haman, who thought that he was going to be rewarded, and now he had to publicly honor Mordecai. This was followed by the queen's banquet, where Esther revealed her Jewish identity to the king and pleaded for a people who were to be annihilated because of Haman's evil plan. Haman became very afraid in the presence of the king and queen and pleaded for his life, but to no avail. The king, in his anger, decided to hang Haman on the same gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. The king gave Mordecai his signet ring and that he had given to Haman, and appointed him as his governor over the entire Persian Empire. The king issued a new decree that the Jews could defend themselves on the appointed day of their annihilation, and that they could destroy all those who dared to come against them. At the end of the story, the Jews were no longer afraid to reveal their identity, as the fear of the Jews had come upon all the people of the empire, and many of them had converted to Judaism. The Jewish people, under the leadership of Mordecai, were ruling over the pagan world power of its day. During the Feast of Purim this weekend, pause to think about the story of Esther and how God delivered his people from annihilation at the hands of the evil Haman. In every generation, evil dictators have arisen who wanted to destroy the Jewish people. We can see this in history with the ancient Greeks and the Roman Empire to the expulsion of the Jews in the Middle Ages. In the 20th century, we saw this with the rise of Nazism that brought terror and fear throughout Europe, and they were responsible for the murder of over 6 million precious Jewish lives on an industrial scale. To President Nasser of Egypt, who threatened to drive the nation of Israel into the sea before the Six-Day War in June 1967. Recently, the Islamic Republic of Iran's president, Ahmadinejad, threatened to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Today we are witnessing that same spirit of hatred for the Jewish people that we have not witnessed since the 1930s and the 1940s. You only have to read the newspapers or watch the news on your television screens, and you will discover stories like ISIS that is plotting terrorist attacks on the British Jewish community. The British Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, has issued a warning to the Jewish community that the Islamist terrorist organization is preparing a terror attack against them. She was reported as saying in the Daily Mail that Islamic State, also known as Daesh, had identified Jews as a legitimate and desirable target. The Community Security Trust, that is the communal Jewish organization that provides security for the Jewish community, recently issued its own annual report on anti-Semitism, stating that 2016 was the highest on record for the number of anti-Semitic instances recorded in the UK. We should not be fearful, because the story of Purim gives us hope, because the God of Israel is faithful to his chosen people, because he has a plan and a purpose for Israel and the Jewish people. There is a famous story that illustrates that God is sovereign in the affairs of men, in which Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany asked Otto von Bismarck, his prime minister, "Can you prove the existence of God?" And Bismarck replies, "The Jews, your majesty, the Jews." Bismarck said this because the Jewish people have outlived every empire and every world power that's come against them have been consigned to the rubbish bin of history. God's warning behind the story of Esther in the celebration of Purim is that those who come against the Jewish people come against the God of Israel.